and welcome back to episode 30 of the Mastering Your Fertility TV. I'm Dr. Haley Nye.
I'm Kristen Cornett.
And we are here to bring you another great interview with my very good friend, Krista Barlow. So the reason why we decided to choose Krista to interview is she has a very unique story. About 6 years ago, she and her husband got married and they decided to start a family. She was 32 years old, so she was very anxious to just get started and get going right away. And it was a very interesting process because she spent all her life, she was with her husband actually for 14 years before they got married. And so she spent all this time avoiding pregnancy. She did not want to get pregnant. So she thought that it would just happen at a drop of a hat when she stopped taking birth control.
Don't we all?
Exactly. We all feel that. And what happened is not that, basically. It took her 6 very long years of trying everything naturally that she could possibly think of, going to multiple doctors, and just no success. And so what's interesting about this story is that she also was pursuing a degree in a master's of nutrition. So that's actually where we met. We were doing the same program together. And she's a holistic nutritionist and works with clients one-on-one every day. And so she just thought, the natural route was her route, like that she was going to get pregnant naturally. And so her story just took a very interesting turn where she ended up having to turn to a fertility clinic and have a more conventional route to pregnancy. So she tells us her story, and it's a very inspiring and eye-opening story. And so we hope that you enjoy that. I'm actually going to give you a little bit more detail about who Krista is, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, excuse me.
Whoever I am.
Yeah. Krista has a Master's of Nutrition Master's of Science in Nutrition from the National University of Natural Medicine, or NUNM, in Portland, Oregon. And she is, again, a holistic health coach and owns her own company called Nutritional Love, where she works one-on-one with clients and in small groups. She focuses on fertility, MTHFR gene mutations, nutritional detoxification, and digestive wellness. She's also an adjunct professor at her university alum where she teaches functional nutrition. Lastly, but not least, she is a beauty counter consultant where she works to educate and advocate for safer skincare products and personal care products. She's converted me this year to Beauty Counter. I've been using their products and I absolutely love them. So if you wait to the very end of the episode, we're going to give you a little bit more details on how to get connected with Beauty Counter and as Krista as the Beauty Counter rep, if that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah, so another thing that we talk about in this episode is genetics. So one of the things that Krista works with a lot in her practice is MTHFR genetic SNPs, which if you haven't heard of those, we've talked about them several times on the podcast. We also have a blog, 2 blogs actually, about genetics. And we wanted to talk to you this week about our preferred lab for testing your genetic SNPs. So we discuss MScN Labs, which is our preferred genetic testing company. And there's several reasons that we really like them. And so you'll be able to find the blog article. We have a link if you go to tinyfeet.co/podcast. You're looking for episode 30. You'll find a link to that blog article. And it talks about the 4 reasons why we love MScN so much. And just a snippet of why that is. We really like them because their reports are amazingly easy to read. They're very actionable. They're easy to refer back to. So when you get genetic reports from maybe some other testing companies like 23andMe, they give you a raw data file that you then have to take somewhere else to have it interpreted. And then those reports vary a lot from company to company, and they don't always give you actionable data that you can interpret and use without like somebody who's a specialist in genetics. So what we love about MScN is that they give you information that is actionable, super easy to read, very simple report that tells you exactly what you can do, different forms of nutrients that might be best for your body, different dietary approaches that might help support your unique genetics. And all of this has a lot to do with your fertility. There are certain SNPs that really can impact your health in a way that affects your ability to conceive. So if you're interested in learning more about how your genetics might be affecting your health and fertility, we encourage you to check out that blog, or you can just get started right away with ordering your kit. And you can find that link in the same place, tinyfeet.co/podcast episode 30 and get started with ordering. So we'll jump into the episode.
Enjoy.
Hi, and welcome, Krista. Thank you for joining the Mastering Your Fertility podcast today. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, ladies. I am happy to be here.
Great. All right, so let's get started telling your amazing story. First, tell our listeners where you're from and how you got interested in holistic nutrition.
I am originally from a small town in Northern California, and which I'm so happy to call my roots, I guess you can say. It's a really great place to grow up. It's a really great place not to live anymore as an adult, just because it's, to get out of there. But I landed in Portland about 14 years ago, and it has been the perfect mix. I moved here from San Francisco after living in Willits, and then Portland has become the perfect mix of San Francisco and Willits. So I'm really happy to call this my home now.
It's a good place to live, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And what got you interested in nutrition?
So like many, actually there's several reasons that I got interested in nutrition, but when I was really young, I started, just experimenting, I guess you could say, with how food was making me feel. And I put myself on a vegetarian diet when I was in 7th grade, started cooking for my family. It was, there was not a lot of education around it. And so my vegetarian diet wasn't the most healthy vegetarian diet. And I mean, a vegetarian diet just isn't the best for my unique biochemistry anyway. But that's what started me on this path, just to kind of see how my body was reacting. I've had, my own health issues for years. And so as I continued along my path and working in San Francisco, I worked in the HIV and AIDS community and saw kind of a pretty dark side of medicine. And that at that time, I was getting ready to apply to pharmacy schools and gearing up for that world, because in that time I felt like I knew what I wanted to do. And that was kind of it. And then I saw, opened my eyes to a lot of different things and couldn't do it anymore. So I ended up studying nutrition a lot. I started studying functional nutrition a lot on my own at that point. And then I moved to Portland and got my degree in public health and then my master's in nutrition.
Awesome.
Yep. Yeah.
Such a cool story. So yeah, a lot of similar themes on our podcast of where we have our own personal experiences and then just feeling let down by conventional medicine or, seeing the chronic disease and really know where to turn. So that's a pretty amazing story. But we are here to talk about kind of your personal journey, your fertility journey. And so let's go back to when you met your hubby and when you guys got married.
Sure. So we met quite a while before we got married. We got married 6 years ago, but we are nearing our 19-year anniversary in October. So we have been together for a little while. We met in San Francisco. We actually both grew up in Willits, that's a tiny little town. And we didn't know each other growing up. And so my best friend and her now husband introduced us, and we started dating, and the rest was kind of history. We ended up here. Yeah, it was great. And then we decided to get married. Bought a house, did all the things, and getting married it wasn't like that important until we decided to do it. And then it really became that oh my gosh, this is why people get married. This is incredible. We had a 4-day event. My friends and our closest friends and family were all together. It was so much fun. I'd do it every year if I could afford it.
It's a fun experience. It definitely is a fun experience to kind of bring everybody together. It's a fun celebration. I mean, even if you're already committed to each other, you've already decided you're going to spend your lives together. There's just something about that event and kind of making it official with everybody and celebrating it together that just makes it just that much more special.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I actually had a very similar feeling about marriage too, especially already having a child out of wedlock. But now we've made the commitment and chose a date next year, and I'm now planning my wedding. So
Yay!
it's super exciting. I have like a very same feeling of like once we chose the date, then it's like
then it was a big deal.
All the all the butterflies start coming and the excitement of planning. So that's really amazing that you had such a great wedding, because you guys were together for such a long time that you could have easily just been like, oh, we're just, we're going to elope and keep going on with our lives. So, and during that time, before you got married, you were actually had some serious career goals laid out, and you were actively avoiding pregnancy at that time, right? So for many years, avoiding pregnancy. And just tell us what your experience was with the form of like birth control that you were trying to use. And
so when we moved, a year before we moved to Portland, I had started using the OrthoEvra. Like I'd been on birth control for several years. I mean, you try everything, right? When you're not ready, you try everything. You do everything you can to prevent pregnancy. And about a year before we moved here, I started using the OrthoEvra patch. And about 2 months after I started having really, really bad anxiety and panic attacks. Never, ever have I had panic attacks in my life until then. And I didn't know, believe me, I was like thinking, oh, what happened to me as a child? What have I suppressed? You know what I mean? Like, because my doctor wanted to put me on Xanax, and I was like, I'm going to get to the root of this and figure out what the heck's going on. And so I actually taught myself how to manage those, because I didn't even think that it was birth control. I didn't even connect the dots at all. And then we moved to Portland, and I was so crazy about trying to figure out what the heck was wrong with me that, I became really fast friends with my butcher. He went through all the spices for me to make sure there was no gluten in them. He was ordering me chicken feet and all the bones. Now it's very common to get all that, but 15 years ago it was not. And I went off caffeine. I wasn't drinking alcohol. I didn't have sugar. I was trying to just be as clean as possible. But I'm on birth control. And so I just was like, stop that. I took the patch off, and I will never forget, ever, ever, ever forget the day that I got up in the morning. It was August, and I walked from my bedroom into the kitchen. And for the first time in a year, I felt grounded. I felt like my feet were planted on the ground, that I was normal again. And that started my research on estrogen and, how much you actually absorb estrogen through, topically with the patch, and how that affects anxiety and panic attack. It sent me down a pretty big rabbit hole. But then I was like, I'm never going to go on birth control again, ever. I was done. And so at that point, this is kind of, I have a lot of friends who got pregnant doing the good old pull-out method.
Right.
But we really did. We weren't ready to have a baby by any means, but we did. And we did everything that we could naturally to prevent that. And it worked, but everybody was like, that's never worked for me. So I feel looking back on that, when we really started to try to get pregnant, that's when I was like, oh, I probably should have paid attention to that back then a little bit more. At that point, it was such a relief, because I was in school, I was working, I was teaching, I was in the throes of a very, very, very busy life, that I was relieved that I wasn't getting pregnant, because I didn't have time for that. But when we started trying to get pregnant, I didn't really think that it was going to end up the way it did.
Yeah. I think a lot of women can actually really relate to what you're saying, because we do spend so much time trying not to get pregnant. Mm-hmm. And we will stay on birth control and not even think that that's possibly causing us symptoms.
Oh, I can relate to that.
Yeah, Kristen can relate to that.
Definitely. Well, we're just taught, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but we're just kind of taught that you can just look at a man and you'll just get pregnant, if you're not on birth control. And so we get really concerned and really kind of obsessive about making sure that we're preventing pregnancy. And it just doesn't ever really occur to us that when we stop taking it, that it's not just going to happen immediately, easily, and then those of us that suffer other complications from being on the pill. And, I had some
Mm-hmm.
lasting things that are kind of results of being on birth control for a long time. It doesn't compute, you don't associate it with birth control. You don't think that that's what could be causing it. And it becomes really difficult when you get off the pill, when you get off birth control.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't happen right away. And you're kind of stuck with some other health challenges as well. It's a tough situation.
Right.
Well, and then it was crazy because I remember going to my doctor and just being like, I am so screwed. I've been putting this out into the universe for so long that I don't want to get pregnant. And now I'm never going to be able to because it's my karma. I'm like, it's the secret.
Oh man.
I'm, it's like I screwed myself over because I tried so hard not to do it. And I was so scared of it for so long. But
Isn't that amazing though? You, as women, we still end up somehow blaming ourselves for.
Right. I know. I was just going to say,
like that.
Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Okay. And so at what age and point in your life when was it that you decided that you said, yes, we're going to start trying. Let's go for it.
I was 32. We got married May 19th. Our anniversary is this weekend. And we said, okay, as soon as we get married, like I just graduated with my undergrad degree, and right after I graduated, we started planning a wedding, got married, and we were going to be doing some traveling in Thailand. So we worked all summer, and then we went to Thailand for a month. And we actually ended up training Thai boxing there. And so I was like, we don't necessarily I don't want to get pregnant before we leave. And I mean, if we get pregnant there, then awesome. Like all bets are off. We'll totally try, but we're not going to try and prevent while we're there. And then when we get home, we'll really start trying. Well, I'll tell you, every single one of my friends was like, okay, so when you're in Thailand, this is what you need to do. I mean, it was like all the crazy folkloric advice you could imagine. And it was very funny. But that's when it began. So I was 32 when we really started actively trying.
And did you have other things going on with your health at that time as well?
Mm-hmm.
Like, were there some kind of funky health issues going on that you maybe needed to investigate a little bit more?
Oh, yeah. So I've had gut problems my whole entire life. And my last term of undergrad, I was taking 21 credits. I was working a full-time job. I was doing 2 internships. I was really burning the candle at both ends. And that was like the worst flare up I have ever had in my life with my gut. And to the point where my doctor, they were scheduling, I had like 2 or 3 colonoscopies that year. Everything was ruled out. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And and now I know how sensitive I am to stress. Like stress is the biggest trigger for me that you can't imagine. And now it's like any stress, any kinds of stress will trigger. But, I had a lot of inflammation, a lot of inflammation. And I knew that I wanted to calm that down and kind of put the fire out before I got pregnant. But I was also 32 years old and starting to freak out too, that I was getting older. And so I was just kind of like, okay, let's do this. And I can continue taking care of myself while I'm pregnant. And that was a really hard, it was hard. That was hard on my heart. And it was hard on my mind, just knowing what I knew back then, even about how the body works with, inflammation and trying to sustain a pregnancy and trying to get pregnant and all that stuff. So.
And you were concerned.
I was very concerned.
Rightly so. So you ended up seeing a naturopathic doctor. So
I'd been working with a doctor.
Yeah. So talk us through kind of what you were doing in terms of like testing and trying to address some of those things.
Testing, I did. So I had a few colonoscopies. We did blood work. We did SIBO. Back then, SIBO was really the testing was really bad. There was a lot of false negatives, a lot of false positives. And so we mainly just went off of symptoms. And I did elimination diets. I didn't do steroids, although they did want to put me on steroids, but I did not do those. I did high dose antioxidants. glutamine. I did a whole regimen of diet, but I didn't really take the lifestyle part into effect until quite a bit later. And this is when I was working with my GI naturopath, and I started to get a lot better. Like a lot of my symptoms started to resolve. And then he referred me to a naturopathic doctor who is a fertility specialist. And so her and I worked together for a long time, and we tried, that's when all the testing for fertility started.
When did you get tested for MTHFR? Because even that was really novel back then, right?
Totally. And that was by accident. So that was during the Boston Heart study. And my GI naturopath at the time said, hey, they're doing this study. Let's run these tests on you and check all your inflammatory markers and go from there. Why not? It's just going to give us more information. And so my husband and I both did that without any idea of MTHFR. I didn't even really know what it was at that point. And, when I got the test results and seeing that I was compound heterozygous, my doctor just was like, okay, just make sure you're taking methylated folate and B12. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. But it wasn't until I was really, really, really hungover one day that I started doing a little bit more research into MTHFR and detoxification. And that's when I went to my naturopath, and I said, I just was there in tears, and I said, I'm handing myself over to you. I can't do this for myself anymore. Like, this is all the stuff I'm learning. It's sending me down a lot of rabbit holes. Just the whole feeling of, what am I doing? What have I done to myself? Like, these kinds of things that were coming up. And she was great. She was really great. She took it off we had like kind of a handoff moment, and it was great because she calmed me down. And it's funny because I do a lot of work with people with mostly women, but people who have MTHFR, and it really is not kind of walking people, helping them back up from walking off the ledge, because it's scary, and there's a lot of fear-based information out there.
Krista, can you tell us a little, because you've done a lot of this, like you just mentioned, MTHFR work with clients and experiencing it yourself. And of course, we've mentioned on the podcast, but somebody who's just listening, who's new, who hasn't listened to any of our past podcasts, can you just give them a rundown of what MTHFR is, just kind of a quick summary, and how that actually affected you personally, I guess, in your fertility journey?
Sure, totally. So MTHFR is a gene and an enzyme. And it converts folic acid or folate into the active form of folate, so that you kind of think about cogs and wheels. And if there's a different, it's a variant. Some people say mutation. I'm not the biggest fan of that language, but if the shape of the gene is tweaked a little bit, which can happen, and it happens, it's 1 out of 3 people has a variant in the MTHFR pathway. So, it can slow down activating folate into the active form. And if that active form isn't going over into the other cogs and wheels, then it can build up homocysteine, which is an inflammatory marker. It can also bog down detox pathways. It really does affect DNA synthesis, which is pretty big when we're talking about creating a human. As well, for so many different things, but it bogs down detox. It really affects your liver and your kidneys. A lot of it's methylation is what we're referring to. And a lot of that happens in the gut. And so if you have gut issues, then you have methylation issues, whether you have an MTHFR variant or not. And there's different degrees of how well you're going to convert folate into the active form, depending on how, if you have a gene from your mom and a gene from your dad that are both, a variant of that gene, then you have 2 copies, then you're homozygous. Then your ability to convert goes down significantly. I have a gene from my mom, or from one of my parents. I can't blame anybody, but in 2 of the clinically significant polymorphisms, which is the C677 and the 1298. So it's called the compound heterozygous, meaning that I have one copy from each, which it slows down conversion to active folate. It's really, really important to get folate from your diet versus just throwing supplements.
Right.
So a lot of the work that I do is all around diet, lifestyle, and mindset, because that is foundational. And a lot of people who do a 23andMe or they get an MTHFR test and they find out that they have a variant, they become very freaked out about that and just start throwing a bunch of supplements, and those supplements can push you in the other direction. And you got to find that, you have to find that Goldilocks area. And if you're throwing supplements at something and you're living a very toxic lifestyle, then it's really not going to help that much.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not about giving a supplement or a medication. Yeah. Sometimes it's about, adding in nutrient-dense foods and removing blocking factors. Yeah. And we've talked about that the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So coming back to your fertility journey, how long were you trying to conceive naturally before you were kind of referred on to the next step in the fertility process?
6 years.
6 years.
Yeah.
And at that point you were referred to a reproductive endocrinologist, is that right?
Yeah. Yep. I was referred to a reproductive endocrinologist, and it took me probably about 6 months in order to do it, in order to actually make the phone call. And then it was really interesting because as soon as I called a friend of mine who is an OBGYN to get a referral for a reproductive endocrinologist, I found out that she also had fertility issues and went the same route as I did. I found out from a lot of people that I would have never known were having fertility issues. It was very eye-opening to me to be like, what? Because I felt really alone. I felt really alone. That's one of the things that I can say. And I almost felt ashamed. And then as soon as I started talking about it, it just opened up a whole new world, and more people would share their stories. And I'm like, oh my gosh, wait a minute. Your, oldest was IUI, or you went through IVF or you had 3 cycles of IVF. Oh my, I would have never known this. And so one of the things that, I've also been doing is trying to normalize it a little bit more. It's okay to talk about.
Definitely. Yeah. We need to spend time bringing attention to this topic because it is very isolating.
Yeah.
It's very emotional, and it brings up a lot of negative feelings, and then we internalize those, and then it just makes everything worse on the journey, to be dealing with that kind of emotion. And I can totally relate to that. So tell us about your experience with that reproductive endocrinologist, and, what was some of the testing that was done? What did they find? How did it feel, to be moving on to this next step in the process?
It was, I love my doctor. I loved her. She's amazing. And it was really interesting because I went through Oregon Reproductive Medicine, and I called them. They were in contract, trying to finalize a contract with my insurance company. They had been in negotiations with them for several months. And so I just kind of felt like, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to go to that place anyway, because my insurance actually did cover some fertility treatments. When I went on vacation, I came back on a whim. I called, and they just finalized the insurance contract. So I ended up going there. It was like, this is where I kind of believe in that, okay, I'm putting it out there in the universe, and the universe is providing, because it was it was just, everything just kind of fell into place. I got in to see the doctor that was referred to me. She was so awesome at explaining the whole process to myself and my husband. It started to go really quickly. So I mainly just had blood work, a pap. We were on the fence between IUI and IVF. And so they did the dye test, and I can never pronounce that.
Histosalpingogram.
Yeah, there you go. HSG, yes. And so when I did that test, at that moment, literally in the office while it was happening, the doctor was like, oh, the dye is not going through the ovaries as it should be. And so that in that moment, they said, you're going to have to do IVF. Because IUI is just
essentially blocked tubes.
Yeah, the assumption, and the only way to really go in there to really diagnose this is to go in there and look. But the assumption is that I have endometriosis in my ovaries, because the way they explained it was acting kind of as Velcro, so the eggs aren't getting into the fallopian tube. I don't really know. I mean, that was a very, a simple way of saying that, but either way, it was the decision that day that was made. And so at that point, I was at that point, I can honestly say that I had my kind of like come to Jesus moment and was ready to go all in.
Yeah. I'm curious with the test though, how you felt like when they said, oh, the diet's not going through. Did you feel like relieved that was, oh, this felt like an answer, like why it took so long to actually for now that you're at this current point? And then also, did you feel kind of maybe upset that you didn't have that test done earlier, just to kind of know?
Absolutely. There were a lot of times that I was like, why didn't we do this earlier? Like, why didn't I do this earlier? There were a lot of those moments.
And what do you think stopped you from just going in to like, did you ever go to your OBGYN and say, hey, can I get some fertility tests done?
I didn't, because I was really stubborn, and I was like, nope, I want to do this naturally. I want to, there's reasons for this, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it, and I can do it.
So what kind of advice would you give to our listeners who are in a very similar situation? I mean, they're listening to Mastering Your Fertility. They're most likely very similar to you, where they're like, I just want to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to, keep pushing forward and not kind of ignore some of those more conventional tests that can be done.
Don't ignore the conventional tests, because those tests give us more information. Right. And the great thing is that a lot of them actually are covered on your insurance. And so you can get them done. The more information that you can gather with your healthcare provider and your care team, the better. With that said, that more information can also be more kind of fear mongering too. And so tread lightly with that. And this is kind of where listening to your intuition is so, 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 so powerful. And the fact that I couldn't have babies naturally, it put like a bump, I guess you could say, in the way that I felt about myself and my body. But I hopped over that bump. I did. You get through it, and this is your journey. Like this is the journey that you're on, and you can still do so much to optimize your chances of conception, whether it's naturally, whether it's IUI, whether it's Clomid, whether it's IVF. You do have some control, and I feel like that is one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give anybody that's going through any fertility challenges, is to really listen to your intuition and surrender and be really gentle on yourself. You can feed yourself all the best foods that you can possibly do. But if you aren't feeding your heart and soul, then you're really missing a big part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And that's a dynamic equation right there. And it's really difficult for people who have a tendency to live peripherally, myself included, right? I mean, being cerebral and being meditative and really coming inside and being heart-centered it's hard. It's hard to spend time with yourself. It's hard to really get to the bottom of things. And it's a really big piece of that.
I think so many women are so prone to kind of, beating themselves up. And
Mm-hmm.
and on the one hand, you have really super intense type A people, and they tend to be really successful in their lives, personally and professionally because of that drive. But there's also the sort of kind of really critical, subconscious, like tape recorder playing in the background all the time with a lot of this, like the drive is negative. It's negative emotions, it's negative feelings, it's kind of beating yourself up. And I think that becomes really hard for women on the fertility journey.
Oh my gosh, it becomes so hard. It becomes so hard. And one of the things that was soon, as soon as we decided we were going forward, my husband and I weren't quiet about it at all. Like, we were screaming it from the mountaintops, this is what we're doing. We're really excited about it, and we're embracing it. And, I went to a holiday party, and about 4 or 5 women gathered around me. And it was really interesting, because as I was looking around, we were all moving to a very private place in the house until the questions were asked and stories were shared. And I was like, hold on a second. Can we go back out in front of other people? Because this doesn't need to be shamed. Like, this should be a conversation that we can have at a party. It's totally okay. We're all here together, and we're here sharing our stories together. And I love that they were coming to me and being that amazing force, that amazing, just protection. Because I feel like women are so good at that, but in the sense of celebration, not the sense of hidden and shame, Yeah. So it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool in that moment, just to kind of step back and see this, and then start to nudge us also back out into the into the crowd. But yeah, I mean, and that's another thing too, is call on your network, call on your friends. I mean, Haley knows there were many times I was in tears with her, but when you have a really good network and you can be vulnerable, it's really good. I mean, there's a lot of, and I keep going back, there's a lot of things that you can do nutritionally, and lifestyle to really, really work on that egg quality and the sperm quality.
Yeah.
But the mindset is
Yeah, I really appreciate you talking about that mindset, because, I feel like when we make a mindset shift, or when we have a really good conversation with a friend on the phone, where maybe you cried, you let some of that emotion out, or you talk to your mom, or whoever it is, it's so healing. You can feel it in the moment. You hang up that phone and you just feel like a weight has been lifted, and you feel calming, kind of like what you're saying. You feel grounded, your feet are on the ground. And I feel like in our society, especially in the American society, is where we really underestimate the power of how that heals our body.
Connection and positive experiences. Yeah, definitely.
well, and also it's not just I mean, if you're going into this journey, if you're going into this realm of fertility, in a totally, I mean, it's very science, it's a very, very sciencey kind of way. It sounds kind of funny, but it's true. You're going into a very, you're handing over your ovaries, really. They're putting you on a schedule. Your care team is putting you on a schedule. But knowing that it's not just you, it still takes two. And to really be open and honest with your partner, especially because we have a tendency to hold things in, and our partners aren't mind readers, and they really do want to be a part of the process. Every person that I've talked to that has had fertility issues or has gone the same route that I have gone, that was a really big kind of hurdle to overcome, was to involve their partner. Yeah. And it gets so much easier when you do, and it's fun. This is your journey. Embrace it.
Speaking of which, tell us what happened. We haven't even gotten to the end of this yet.
Yeah.
How did you do IVF, and how was that experience, and what was the outcome for you?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So the experience, I have to say, it was phenomenal. It was really incredible. The moment that I really did embrace it and surrender and take control of the things that I could control and release the things that I couldn't, I learned everybody's name because I was going into the office every few days to get blood work done. So I learned everybody's first name. I really took them. I mean, they are my care team. So if you are feeling really comfortable with your care team and you trust them, it reduces the stress, right? So I had a great time. It was fun going in and seeing everybody every few days. The whole stimulation was really hard. That was rough. Like I didn't realize, like you hear about IVF, but unless if you know a lot about it, and when you go through it, I felt like it was going to be this really long, drawn out process. It was really fast. And I was terrified to give myself shots. It was piece of cake, totally easy. I really didn't want to stop exercising because that was a form of stress reduction. But when your ovaries get really, really large, you don't want to exercise. And so it hurts. Yeah, totally. And so, going through the stimulation was pretty rough, but at the same time, it just was part of it. And it was really fast. When they went in for retrieval, those are the hard times. Those are the hard times is when they go in for retrieval and you're waiting to find out. You're waiting to find out how many embryos they got or how many eggs they got and how many were mature and how many fertilized and how many made it. It was like this pins and needles. That right there is keep yourself preoccupied. And then we ended up with 2 viable embryos and we implanted one, and we have a new baby girl now, and she is amazing. And everything just went so perfectly. It really did. And I'm very, very, very fortunate because I know plenty of families and couples and women out there that have gone on through many cycles of IVF, and my heart goes out to them because it can be really hard. But we did it, and I'm thankful every single day.
Do you feel like a lot of the support that you did and, being so focused on your health, your diet, your lifestyle, your mindset, you feel like that had an influence on the outcome for you guys?
I do. I really, really do. I really do. I feel like I felt really safe, and I felt protected, and I felt loved, and I felt supported. And I felt like I had this incredible community of people who were celebrating the process with me. And it's priceless. It really is. And I really feel like that was a big impact, had a big impact on our success. And just really being present and enjoying the process in so many different aspects. When we think about goal driven situations, whether it's, having a baby, or whether it's losing weight or healing your gut, or, running a marathon, we get really focused on the end goal, which is awesome. But if you just be present and really enjoy the process, then a lot of growth can happen and a lot of magic can happen. And I feel like that is so, so important when you are on a fertility journey.
Yeah, I think we would all agree with that for sure.
And then there, of course, there were other things too. I mean, I'm a control freak, so I had a really hard time turning over my ovaries, and the things that I could have control over, right? So I did supplement. I did everything that I could in my power to take care of myself.
That's great. So you felt like you had some form of control still, while you felt like, oh, I'm handing over my ovaries to this care team. And then I really love how you explained that, because it's almost like your care team, you're handing your ovaries over to the care team. So you want to make sure that you are enjoying your care team and you know their names, and that you feel like your ovaries are in a very good hands.
Exactly.
Every time you show up, to get the ultrasound, or to pick up your meds or whatever it is. So I'm really sure that made such a big difference in this process for you, and just the quality of the eggs that they were able to get, and uh, you ended up having 2 viable embryos, which is just absolutely amazing.
So that was probably one of the hardest days when we found out we had 2, because we had 13 mature and all 13 fertilized. And then going from 13 to 2 was, it was very, and I still think of it as like, whoa, that was really an interesting way of feeling like more is better, when really I don't need I'm not going to have 13 babies. You know what I mean? And so it's interesting it was a really interesting thing to explore mentally about how to.
That's a huge difference. And
yeah,
especially if you're not super well versed on the results of egg retrieval, and how when you hear 13 have fertilized, then the assumption is, great, 13 fertilized, like how amazing, I have 13 embryos. But there's so much division and stabilizing that has to happen over those next 5 days, that it's really common that you do end up only walking away with 1, 2, or 3.
But some of it is that mindset, though, that it's a goal-oriented activity that you're engaging in. And, if you're an achievement-oriented person, when you see those numbers come down, I could see that being really kind of messing with you a little bit mentally and emotionally, thinking like, well, I started with 13 and I only ended up with 2, and shouldn't I have at least had 5 or 7? Well, right. It's like a probability game too. I mean, we know that IVF to some extent really is a numbers game. It's how's your body responding to stimulation? How many eggs are we able to retrieve? How many fertilize? How many are mature? How many embryos did we get? What's the quality? We even assign numbers to qualitative assessments to the embryos. And so I think the process itself to some extent does feed that mindset just a little bit. And I think that's just something that you have to, try to stay centered about and try not to be too discouraged about, I think.
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think also, so once I got the phone call that I was pregnant, that was one of the best days ever. But then it was like, okay, doing everything that you can to stay pregnant. And that's, and then that's a whole nother part of it. That's a whole nother part of it. Right. And I had a little bit of a difficult pregnancy that they monitored me a lot through my 3rd trimester. But, like I said, your care team is, I was right in the throes of the standard of care. And that was kind of being in the holistic health field for so long, and then getting thrown into MFM, and having my OB is an incredible woman, and she's very open to integrative therapies, which is awesome. But when you go into maternal fetal medicine, they see really high risk cases, right. And it was a very sterile environment, and very very serious all the time.
Different than the way that you would be used to working clinically, totally, just a totally different, paradigm that you're, and I think it's probably difficult to go from the paradigm that you operate in all the time as a practitioner, as a nutritionist, to one where you're subjected to something that's much different, and maybe doesn't necessarily 100% align with your values all the time. So,
but the great thing about
because, well, being pregnant, or the act of becoming pregnant, being pregnant, childbirth, is such a spiritual thing, right? Mm-hmm. But now in the modern world, it really has become more of a sterile thing, just like what you were talking about. You walk in this hospital, it's white, like you have, people are just monitoring you, and you hear beeps and sounds, and
numbers.
Numbers. And it just becomes such a sterile thing. And I think intuitively, as women, we know that it's really supposed to be much more of a spiritual transition in life, and for the baby and for you. And so it's nice to have a midwife that can kind of bridge the gap between the two.
I was just going to say, it can definitely still be that spiritual journey. In that, as long as you have some direction and you also can take a beat before you make a decision.
Yeah. Right.
Unless if it's an emergent decision, there's a lot of things that you can actually say, hold on, let me think about that for a second before we just rush into this next thing. And midwives and doulas, and, you're like, I was in the hospital for 4 days and I had acupuncturists come in, and it was 2 doulas. It was really awesome. And I actually became friends with everybody at MFM too.
Of course you did.
It has. That's really, for me to feel really comfortable. I feel like that's an important thing, is to have that authenticity and to and to show that to other people so that they show it to you as well. Because we all live in this world together. We should enjoy it, even
and
if
we're all human. And I feel like the people in the hospital at the MFN center probably gave you a little extra love because they felt loved too. So it's nice to have kind of that
we
feedback
respond in
loop.
kind to how we're treated. So
yeah, totally.
Well, Krista, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. And I love what you shared and some of the messages that you had for our listeners. I think this will be a really encouraging episode, especially for women who maybe were really committed to doing the natural process and then have maybe found out that they need to seek out fertility treatment. I particularly like the way that you talked about how you kind of framed that in your mind and gave yourself over to the process, and it ended up being successful for you. And I really think that can be inspiring and helpful to others that might be having a similar experience. So we appreciate you being here and sharing your story.
Do you have any last words for our listeners that you think they should walk away with?
Oh my goodness. Just enjoy the process, that your journey is your own. Careful not to compare yourself to others, and enjoy your process, because it really is that. It is beautiful and it is yours.
I love that.
Very wise words. Well, thanks again. You have a great evening.
Oh, thank you so much, gals. You too.
All right, that's going to wrap things up for this week. Thank you so much for joining us for this amazing interview. We really just want to make sure that, you take Krista's advice to heart and, keep all of your options on the table. And we definitely wouldn't want you to miss out, even though we're all about conceiving naturally. We don't want you to miss out on, getting the evaluation that you really need to determine what's going on with your fertility, and just making sure that you're considering all of your options. So we hope that you enjoyed hearing about her story and ultimately her success. We hope that's inspiring and hopeful for all of you guys listening, especially if you're struggling to conceive. So you can find links to everything that we talked about with Krista, her beauty counter, her social media, her website. All of that is on our website. Once again, tinyfeet.co/podcast, and it's episode 30. You can find all the links to her information there. We also want to remind you about MScN Labs. So in the same place, through that podcast link, you can find a link to a blog article where we talk about why we love MScN so much for SNP testing, and also get your kit ordered right away.
And if you liked this video and you feel like it might help a friend or somebody else can be inspired by Krista's story, please share this video and let them know that they're supported.
Yep. All right, we'll see you next week.
Bye.